This is Duke University.
Good afternoon. This is Malachi Hacohen, Chair of the Council of European Studies at Duke University. And we have with us here today a distinguished guest, Professor Erhard Busek, former Vice-Chancellor of Austria and currently the head of the Institute for the Danube region and for Central Europe. And we would like to talk to him today about the future of Europe. He has been one of the major Austrian supporters of the European Union and one of the founders of the European arrangements that have led to current Europe. Professor Busek, I must tell you, I do not understand the European Union. When the Ukraine was getting into difficulties with Russia, the European Union seemed to encourage the Ukraine not to enter into special economic relationship with Russia and held promises of joining the European Union. Then, when the Ukraine did just that and got rid of its pro-Russian government, and the Russian intervened, the European Union does not seem capable of supporting the Ukraine in any substantial way. Did the Europeans mismanage the Ukrainian situation?
First of all, I have to confess, sometimes I'm also not understanding the European Union. But the only argument where you can explain it, I think the European Union is a kind of fleet in being. It is developing and we are learning what we have to do as a European Union. I think the global role of the European Union is not yet defined. And it is very much blocked by internal discussions and also by the egoism of the different nation states collected here. And that's the case with Ukraine also. I think to be very critical, I'm a fan of the European Union, but to be very critical, and that's quite necessary, I fear that a lot of governments in the European Union did not understand what Ukraine is. I think we are living still out of this division between East and West, which passed by, but I think we did not relearn the new map of Europe. And so far, I think Ukraine was always a little bit pushed aside. There were different reasons. One reason was that the Russian government was always very much focusing that nobody of the Europeans is coming too close to the Ukraine. Because for their feeling, and that's a strong argument, Ukraine is still a part of Russia. You have the expression in the Russian language, they are not using the word Ukraine, they are using Malaya Rus, small Russia. Because they have some historical arguments, the baptism of the Russians in Kiev around 1000, and so on and so on. That's the one side. And the other side, I think, it is Slavic brotherhood, which was also here the background. And the Europeans were not really able to do it. Those who were looking more to Russia, good relations, economic reasons, traditionally links. I think you should not forget that France was sometimes cooperating with the Russians to keep the Germans down. I think these old roles are still existing. That was also true. There was never a clear decision what to do with Ukraine. Membership to the European Union, yes or no. So far they created the so-called neighborhood policy, which was not really in detail elaborated, and so on and so on. And there was a certain kind of optimism, the things will go on, and so on and so on. And they didn't calculate that Vladimir Putin was appearing. I think this was one of the strong arguments. And here I may say history strikes back. Vladimir Putin is very much thinking in the categories of the old Soviet Union. This is a kind of imperialism which is back. And it is a success story for him internally, because the Russian population, or those who are in a certain way leading, have the feeling to be marginalized. I think we have been one of the two superpowers. Now I think there were a lot of activities ignoring the importance of Russians, and so far they are compensating. I think the two cases concerning Ukraine are different. The one is Crimea.
Right.
I want to be fair. Crimea has been always a part of Russia. There was a famous Crimean War in the 19th century, and so on and so on. And so far, there are some arguments concerning Sevastopol, where the Navy is based, and so on and so on. What the Russians are not seeing concerning Crimea is the Tatar population, which played a very important role in the past and is still also existing as a minority. I think the Crimea case is not yet finished. It is in a certain way open. I think they offended also international law without any doubt. The problem of Donbass, of the eastern part, is more difficult. What is forgotten, and I'm always mentioning in Brussels this case, I think here where the killing of millions of kulaks by Stalin. I think this is a part where agriculture is quite strong and so on and so on, and Stalin liquidated the kulaks, I think 3.5 million as far as I remember, and put in another population, a Russian population. And also there's an economic strength here existing. Here is interesting that the oligarchs in Ukraine, being based in Donbass, are against a reunification with Russia because they might have a minor role than the oligarchs in Russia. That's a very interesting battle. So everything is open, and may I say, the strategy of Putin is, I think, to create failed states. That's his political strategy, because he can open it, can close it, can open it, close it, and create difficulties.
And so what should Europe do?
I think Europe shall support the Ukrainian government and administration. That is really workable.
But not militarily.
For the moment, not. But there is a certain feeling by some member states. They have the feeling to be endangered by the Russian politics. If you are going to the Baltic states, I think they are very much in favor of more military engagement. And then there's another development which makes me a little bit touchy on this subject. The Swedes and the Finns, they are not part of NATO, but they have decided to put more money in military expenses and so on, because there's a feeling there might be aggression coming by the Russians. That can come. I think Putin knows that it is a difficulty for him, but if Putin is not able to keep the things in hand, and we don't know how far is he really in charge of the movements in Donbass, then that might create a kind of war. I think we have never been so close to a war since the end of the Second World War as we are now.
Well, let us move to another problem region, one in Central Europe. One of the conditions of being admitted to the European Union was that you would have a democratic government, and of course, anti-Semitism is prohibited. This is a new Europe. In the center of Europe, there is a country at this moment, Hungary, where the Prime Minister Orban supports Putin, declares that the days of liberal democracy are over, and he would like to establish an authoritarian form of democracy, and has a significant Nazi party, Jobbik, present in the country. And yet, the European response has been quite mute. Why does Europe not respond?
As an Austrian, I have to say what's happening in Hungary is of great concern for me, and it should be also for Austria. And I'm in a battle with the Austrian government, because I'm always saying you have to engage yourself concerning Hungary, because it's our neighbor. And I think we are connected for a very long time, but also the Austrian government is keeping out. I think we will see what the Germans are doing by a visit of Angela Merkel, but she is only 5 hours in Budapest, which is not really a time to convince. What is the background of the problem? The background of the problem is that the Hungarians started in 1989 quite well as a democratic country. But then, step by step, they got a lot of economic difficulties. And here, it was a leftist government, I think, was putting a lot of money to the people to keep them calm, but not doing the necessary reforms and so on and so on. And that gave Orban a chance. By the way, Orban started as a center-left with his party, and then he was moving step by step to the right. His argument, also to me, because I spoke several times with him, was, I think he has to hinder that the rightist party will become stronger. Now he has Jobbik, for sure, and now he's rewriting history in a very dangerous way. He built up a monument for liberation from Nazi Germany here, and he's forgetting that Hungary was a part of the Nazi Empire for a certain time. And even I think what has happened concerning the Jews was especially done in this time. There was even the Horthy regime more liberal than the so-called Pfeilkreuzler, the fascists, which are coming afterwards. And I think here we have sometimes the suspicion that the brain of Viktor Orban is not quite okay, because I think he's doing misperceptions of situation in quite a horrible way. There is one traditional problem in Hungary, may I say two. The one is the population is divided between the rural people. These are the so-called Kuruzen, which has a long-lasting tradition. It was a protest against the Habsburg monarchy and very much backed by the Calvinists in this time. And the urban situation, where a strong part of Jews were living intellectually, by arts, and so on and so on. And this is a division in the country between the rural side and the urban side, which is still existing. And the second is a problem that Orban is using, but all the parties are using it, the Treaty of Trianon, where the Kingdom of Hungary in the time of the monarchy was 3 times bigger than Hungary is now. There are Hungarian...
There is a map in the center of Budapest. Right. Hungary once, Hungary today, Hungary in the future. And the future looks the way Hungary looked before 1914.
They did even a horrible mistake as they were in the chair of the European Union. They spent a map to the central building of the European Union with the old borders of Hungary. So the Slovaks, the Romanians, the Croats and so on could pass by looking to their future seen from Hungary, which was a complete nonsense. Here you can see it is sometimes really crazy. You are right that the engagement of the member states of the European Union to put pressure is here for sure not enough. It is an education problem. I think you have to invest here more, and you have to discuss it, that they are getting the message. Interesting enough, I think for a long time there were no protests. Now there are protests, and it started by a taxation which Orban wants to do on internet. I think here the modern technology is coming in, and the Hungarians get the feeling, he will cut us off and will hinder that we have relations. So I have a certain hope that things might turn around, but the job is not yet done.
And I would not want to end the interview, although our time is short, without asking you about the economic challenge to the European Union. And of course, I'm talking about the problem of Greece. Yesterday, we heard some news from the Greek government. They were no longer looking for the debts to be forgiven. They are willing to negotiate the repayment over a longer period of time. And I would ask you perhaps briefly, would you have a prediction on how the Greek situation is going to develop? Will Greece remain part of the Euro region in part of Europe?
The intention of the Greek government, the current Greek government, is very strong to stay in the Eurozone and to stay in the European Union. And they are trying to create a conditionality. It's very much depending how it is handled. I have the impression that the new government of Tsipras is learning on the case. It's a kind of a case study which is quite important because it might also happen in Spain or Portugal, that they have a similar movement. So far it is a great importance. I think they are learning. If they are really learning and behaving in the right way and making the transformation of their economic system, that's quite open. I think they have to learn a lot. Recently I was in Athens and I went to a restaurant and again I became no bill, therefore the keeper of the restaurant is paying no taxes. I think they have to lose their manner on this. It is a little bit Balkanic, but don't say it to the Greeks because they are refusing to be a part of the Balkans, so they have invented Europe. I think that will be an interesting discussion because it was a certain kind of, may I say, aristocratic political life there. It was done by 3 or 4 families. You had always the same name, there was always a Papandreou, there was always a Karamanlis, Mitsotakis, and so on and so on. And hopefully I think it will be a more open democracy and a better administration. They are trained to live out bringing all the youngsters into the administration. Their argument is always, this is the influence of the Ottoman Empire out of the past, but they have to get rid of this. That's not the solution.
Professor Busek, I mean, thank you so much for your insight into the European situation. It's so good to have you here. We become optimistic about the future of Europe just by talking to you. So come and visit us often.
Professor Hacohen, I may say Europe has no alternative. I think we have to deal with the globalization process and I think we have to do our job. It's a question of survival of Europe because we are only 7% of the world population, and so far I think we have to create more quality on ourselves.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.